Hey there, HikaNation fans. We are back with Paul Pritchard. And I'm so glad to see you here, Paul. You're looking great.
Thank you very much.
We're so happy that you made it to the 42nd reunion and that you...
What a great group.
Yes, we just had that recently at Jim Kern's place. Phenomenal. Jim did a great job. And we also saw you at the AT Museum exhibit opening for HikaNation when you came and got to see the panel that's on display for HikaNation at the museum. So let's round back a little to how you got involved in HikaNation and what were the important things that you remember about HikaNation?
Well, HikaNation was a solution to a problem that we felt was very important. Thank you. HikaNation, we being Jim, Bill, and I realized we just weren't getting this new organization that the three of us had established,
The American Hiking Society.
American Hiking Society, off the ground.
Right.
So Jim had this brilliant idea of, we had all three met during testimony on the Hill, and we have met at other times also. I went down and talked to the Florida Trail Association. And Jim and I would go canoeing. We went out in Fish Eating Creek and had a great time together. He almost fed me to the alligators, but I don't want to mention that because it doesn't make me feel. So Jim,
how many fingers do you have?
Yeah, I don't know, but I'll tell you, I was about ready to wipe off that mayonnaise off my finger, and I looked down in the canoe. Kern is up there with a camera.
Of course, filming it.
He doesn't care about anything.
Right.
And I look down, and there's this alligator right there in the water.
Just looking at you.
Take that 1 of 5. So I'm very fortunate that I survived that. But really, the three of us had totally different approaches to things. Bill was Mr. Press, Mr. Media, wonderful in the New York market. He knew when we were making a difference, when we were not. Jim was the energy guy, infectious energy in a positive way. I mean, he's totally committed to the Florida agenda for the Florida Trail and to other issues. And he loves to go hiking.
Yes.
He just loves to go hiking.
He's still an Energizer bunny. He's amazing.
Yeah, he is indeed. And I was involved as sort of the guy who knew how to run a charity. That was one of my strengths. The guy who had the recognition of the Appalachian Trail.
Sure.
And somehow the guy who put up with these two old guys who are a couple years older than me. But it was amazing how we had so much in common.
Yeah.
So HikaNation was a realization that Jim brought us to that said, look, we've got to somehow tie these trails together. And except for the Ice Age Trail and several others, most of them were north-south trails, even the Natchez Trace and some of the national park trails. So the idea of organizing this, to me, sounded incomprehensible.
Yes, I would have thought you all were crazy.
Totally crazy.
I mean,
organization.
Who would plan a group hike across the country? And I still am amazed at that whole thing, and that no one died, and what you guys accomplished. But it was an incredible feat with a lot of people involved. So thank you for your involvement.
Well, total volunteers, and boy, every step they took, I became more and more committed and more impressed. I was then the Deputy Director in Interior in charge of the money. And when you control the money for the parks and for the forest and for other agencies, when you call them and just say, hey, this
group is coming through.
Yeah, so can you give them a little help with what they need?
Right.
And that happened on several occasions. Many park managers, forest superintendents were with it. They saw the potential.
They saw the benefits.
So I don't want to suggest in any way these guys were not.
Right.
Many of the women.
Because I know there were a lot of trail dedications along HikaNation. I know that they used it a lot of times to make some improvements in the park. And I know that you're running Interference, that the group was able to learn a lot about America. They had some great speakers from the parks come and talk to them at night. In fact, I have a picture of that. These are some old black and whites that are kind of interesting, but here's one of the park rangers talking to the group and educating them on some of what they're about to see in the park. and then through some of the towns they went through, presented them with keys to the city. And this is Monty.
Isn't that great?
Isn't that amazing? I mean,
And
the
guys
media.
like Marty who
Yes,
just
the
totally devoid
Sagwagon guy who Lieutenant Colonel, only he could do this and make it happen to ramrod it through across the entire country and try and keep the group together and help set up the businesses for what was to come in terms of food and grocery supplies and things like that, logistics. But this is Cindy Bain. She was one of the hikers, but they got a few of the keys to the cities. And then, of course, you always have to have your cheesecake photo. So here's one of the black and white photos of some of the ladies that were hiking along the trail with their old external frame backpacks.
Yep.
And this is my mother, Marcy, who is the oldest at 58. And then this is Janet, who is one of the youngest. And I think, I'm trying to remember what Janet was, early 20s, maybe even less than that, Janet. Sorry, I'm wearing your necklace, by the way. Thank you for that. So anyways, what an amazing group. But you were here in the DC running interference and trying to make sure that the hike continued as possible through. You were at Harper's Ferry and then the welcoming at DC.
There was one person who needs to be mentioned, and that's Glenn Seaborn.
Yes.
Glenn came to one of the American Hiking Society meetings in which we discussed HikaNation.
Right.
He and his wife, beautiful people, just very calm, very quiet, sitting in the very back row. And he, from the moment he heard Jim talk about HikaNation, he bought on. He said, and this is a Nobel laureate,
Yes.
you know, a scientist of great renown. And he and I got to be close friends after that. And suddenly, several months later, after HikaNation was really churning along, we ran into a little problem. I was out in San Francisco talking to my staff who were there at HCRS, and it turned out that the State Highway Department of California wasn't going to let us walk across the Oakland Bay Bridge
At the last minute. Yeah.
Unless they had insurance. And the insurance issue was such that we talked to the highway people, and they said, no, that's the rule. That's the situation. We've got there's another bird out there, a cardinal.
Oh, look at this. We are in his living room, and that's a female cardinal.
Female cardinal. Yeah,
wow.
and there goes
Mr. Conservation right here. He had to have this house with the alligators and the lake and the wonderful wildlife around him.
We love it. So it was Glenn who really got the highway department to bow down.
Yeah.
And it was there was some insurance money made available. We still don't know what happened to that $10,000 for the insurance, but they set aside those lanes for a certain number of hours. And they said, "You guys get on and get off."
Right.
And that was the beginning. Otherwise, the beginning wouldn't have started in San Francisco. It would have started over in Oakland.
Yeah.
And occasionally I get a call from somebody saying, you know, we really can't, we've got liability problems here.
Right.
Well, the federal government has no liability problem because it
see.
self-insures.
I see.
So if something happened to somebody, the federal government would take care of it. They don't buy insurance.
I see.
So from the federal government standpoint, it was easy for me to say to people, look, don't worry about that.
We're sponsoring this event.
We got this signed off by the Secretary of Interior, by the various people above me. So just go ahead and give them all the support you can.
Right.
At Harper's Ferry, that's sort of a hometown for me.
Yeah, that was after miles and miles of walking, and they managed a core group of 40 of them to make it to Harper's Ferry. And then there was a big celebration at Harper's Ferry, and you were there.
And a big celebration. And we were all so amazed, still amazed that it was still going forward. And then the question was getting on the C&O Canal, being able to go down the C&O Canal to Washington, the others who wanted to join, because we had a large crowd in San Francisco.
Sure.
And the crowd...
It was like close to 10,000.
That's right. And we didn't know whether it'd be thousands or hundreds or what as we went down to Washington, D.C. And that was going to be a problem. And also, trail managers, park managers are very concerned about the impact of hundreds of people walking, especially when you get spring rains or you get summer rains.
Well, and it goes back to what you were saying about conservation.
Right.
That we have to look after the plants and the animals and the things like that, and just not, tread through and damage a bunch of things that might take decades to, plant.
The wonderful thing
Okay.
about the hikers was they were sensitive to this.
Yes.
They didn't just sort of destroy terrain as they walked across it. There was a lot of sensitivity. A lot of them were wearing
Awareness.
Keds rather than heavily treaded shoes.
Sure.
Little things like that can make a difference.
Yeah.
But anyway, the problem was that I had left the administration. Carter was defeated.
Yes.
And Reagan was coming in, and Reagan had appointed a guy by the name of James
Watt,
who was clearly opposed. And he and I met when he was just before his hearing in February, and in his office. And I had asked him if he would be supportive of certain programs. I was now at the National Parks and Conservation Association.
So
And
you
I
had
was
left the
still-
government and gone to this next assignment.
That's right. And I was now trying to plan for and help people who were planning for the arrival in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And Watt said, we can't endorse this.
Ah,
And that meant we had no one from the federal government who would be there to greet these people.
wow.
And so I happen to have an unusual relationship with Strom Thurmond, not a hiker, not a conservationist, but a guy who loved physical exercise.
Yes.
At his age, he was very active every day, very physically strong.
Well, I think he was on the President's Fitness Council as
And he
well, or
was.
very supportive of that,
That's right.
which was something that HikaNation also had an involvement with because of Glenn Seaborg. Because Glenn Seaborg, I think, was also involved with the President's Fitness Council. So that was a really good group.
So we got Strom to be the official greeter. And he said a few
welcoming
words.
MC.
That's right. And that was the only reason why he was chosen, and the only reason why they ended up with that experience.
Yes.
And there were all these hikers out in front.
All these hippie hikers with
Yes.
the long hair and beards and
with Strom
ragtag and all this
Yeah.
stuff, and there's Strom Thurmond welcoming them.
and he
that's
was
great.
into it. He was very supportive
That's
of it.
great.
So, that was officially the end of the whole experience.
And I guess James Watt was nowhere to
Never
be
in
seen.
sight. I don't know that he does any trail work except on horseback, and then
Yeah.
he rides. But he was very difficult to deal with for all the conservation agenda,
Right.
opposed to everything basically that we stood for.
Sure.
And
A
trails-
political appointee.
That's right.
Yes. Okay. Enough said. Okay, so HikaNation then was supposed to end in DC, but the group had decided, oh, we dipped our boots in the Pacific Ocean. We want to make sure we go all the way to the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, they taught me a lesson
Yes.
because they were right. To go to the Atlantic Ocean was just as important as how they had started, many of them
I see.
putting their boots in the Pacific. Later in my life, when I was hiking on the Camino, I decided to go all the way to the not just the
End of the earth.
the Catholic Church where the
Right.
trail, Santiago ends, but all the way to the end of the earth, as it was called,
Yeah,
Spanish.
Finisterre.
And I learned that from those hikers, that you had to really complete the whole experience.
Yes.
But I think for me, it was during a period which really was one, if not the golden age of conservation. And trails were part of that experience. And river trails also, canoe trails became very prominent.
Yes.
And today, one of the biggest experiences besides hiking and biking and canoeing, people are really into getting outdoors more
Yes.
so.
Yes.
And I think it's great.
Yeah, and the trails really encompass way more than just the hiking, although it's usually the hiking community that builds and maintains these. But, you've got your snow skiers, your snowmobilers, your ATVers, and there's just the mountain bikers, like you said. So many people now, horse people using trails for many different purposes. And I tend to be a purist. I kind of like my hiking trail without some of the other groups on it, but there's room for everybody. And so HikaNation did accomplish what they were really wanting to do, which was to raise the profile of hiking in America as an energy efficient enterprise, but also as an outdoor activity for health and well-being. And I think hiking's never been more popular.
To go from San Francisco, where you had the consummate environmentalists, to the Capitol steps, where you had Strom Thurmond, the consummate conservationist, conservative politician, spans the whole nation in terms of political agendas and the experiences that they had. And my hat's off to the HikaNation hikers.
Because they did. They as my mother said, it was one long handshake across America. And they met a variety of people, some very welcoming, some that were like questioning what they were doing. And then as they got to know them, they become very friendly, offered church suppers, places to stay in their yards or in their gymnasiums, and they offered tours of their businesses. And they met such a wide range of Americans across the country in the 1980-81 time frame. It really was, as you said, a golden era and a unique time for Americans, and this unusual hike that's never been done before or since. So thank you, Paul, for your part in that.
All right, it's
and
great memory.
Appreciate all you did to help the hikers get across country.